I think every month is going to be like this in terms of our start, in terms of the giggle fits.
Get it all out, y'all. I should take a swig. In 5, 4.
Wait, what happened to the 3, 2, 1? How's it, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Island Connections. Today we have a special guest with us, ʻIhilani Lasconia, who is a Kanaka Oiwi student, artist, and organizer from Waimanalo, Oahu. As an activist and transnational feminist, ʻIhilani is a member of Affirm Hawaiʻi, a wahine-led organization centered on ending patriarchal violence through decolonization and anti-imperialism. Ihi is currently a PhD student at the University of Hawai'i at Mānoa, studying political science with the hopes of bringing Indigenous knowledge to the forefront of our education system. But even more important for our purposes today, Ihi, in the spring of 2021, graduated with her BA in Ethnic Studies, and in the summer of 2022, she graduated with her Master's in Education and Educational Administration as part of the Ethnic Studies combined Bachelor's and Master's program. And as an artist, ʻIhilani's work is rooted in the geopolitical landscape of Hawaii and her experience being queer and Native in the 21st century. So welcome, Ihi. How you been?
Hello. Great. Happy to be here and to be part of such a amazing legacy of the Island Connections show.
Yeah, so today we wanted to talk with you a little bit about your bio, talk about your educational experiences, and also talk about your work as an artist. And so, as I think too, one of the things I forgot to point out, as an artist, you go by a different name. What is your name as an artist?
Yeah, so my artist name is Inalihi or Inalihi, and we can maybe get into the origins of my artist name a little bit later in today's episode.
Okay. All right. But more recently too, you're part of a project that was being done by Shangri-La, is it Doris Duke Foundation, or can you tell us a little bit about that? What was the 8x8 and how did you get involved with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you so much. So I'm currently an artist, an exhibition artist at Shangri-La Museum for Islamic Art. And it's sponsored by the Doris Duke Foundation. And so the series that I'm a part of is actually really cool. It's called 8x8. So there's 8 visual artists, 8 performing artists. And the program was created by Ilnomatic, or Naveed Najafi, who is the cultural program and arts curator for Shangri-La. And so a visual artist. So for this series of 8x8, we had the Hawaii Potters Guild. So we had a visual artist from Hawaii Potters Guild, and then a performing artist. So we had dancers, rappers, beat makers, different musicians pair up, and you're in a space or in a room in Shangri-La, and you have to create an original work of art that's inspired by the space that you're in. So the work that I did, it was called At the Threshold, and I was in this room called the Atapa. And so it was disassembled and then reassembled home from Damascus. And so something that really resonated with me about that space is the thresholds are the really important parts of that household, because you have mo'olelo, or stories and family names that are etched across this home. And so thinking about the power of this space, thinking about thresholds, it's looking at gender, identity, and even genealogy as thresholds that we pass through at multiple points in our life, and how it's never linear in terms of our identity, but it's something we can always revisit and go back and forth with. And so, yeah, it was a great experience. There were other amazing artists there, such as Aina Pai Kai, Raya Tea Helm, Keiki Break. So a bunch of different local and native artists were a part of the project. And it'll still be up until, I believe, late April 2023.
As a Kanaka Oiwi artist, how did you feel being in that space, right? Because in that space there, where it's located, and then also thinking about the way that everything was kind of brought in and the kind of collecting, I guess, that Doris Duke was doing. I mean, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, well, it's definitely haunted there. I can confirm. Spent many hours Doris Duke Foundation, and yeah, it was definitely being there, heavy, and also knowing that there's a long history of museums and their curations or their collections are oftentimes not items that were brought or given to the museum, but were actually stolen. So I actually had to take a lot of time and consideration to thinking about if I ever even wanted to participate in the project. And I truly believe that if it wasn't for Naveed or Illumatic's guidance and foresight in the project, I wouldn't have been a part of it. And so the reason why I chose that specific room at the Atapa is I really wanted to know the history of that specific space and how that specific space was assembled. It was really important for me to be doing work that didn't overshadow the history of a space. So I didn't want to do a piece of art or perform in front of something that I know was stolen. And so investigating the history of that place, I learned that it was the family or the original owners of the home who actually ended up moving. So they decided to disassemble their home and sell it to a collection in New York. And so even though there's maybe some intricacies with that history, knowing that it wasn't forcibly removed from somebody's hands made me feel a little bit better. And it doesn't go without saying that I think Shangri-La deserves valid critique, and we should be working on giving these things back to the original owners or finding the people that these things belong to, but trying to figure out how we can have these conversations while it not just being Shangri-La only, but other local and native artists can figure out how the space should be best used because it's on stolen land. I'm not gonna lie. So Doris Duke acquired that entire property for only $100,000. And now you can't even buy a home in Hawaii with $100,000. So thinking about how can Kanaka use that space and not necessarily be used by it. If you have any questions about that, I can also answer them. I tend to be long-winded without addressing every single thing.
Yeah. No, maybe for folks who don't know, can you kind of explain where that space is at?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Shangri-La, it's on the south side or Kona side of Oahu. It's where I guess the most typical name is Black Point. So it sits right below Diamond Head. Colloquially speaking, it's a very nice neighborhood. But in reality, yeah, it's in Black Point, one of the wealthiest areas in Oahu. It's a gated community. There are folks when we're pulling up to Shangri-La and you have kids on a bus who want to see the exhibition that they're calling security and they're calling police because they think that they're being too loud for the bus idling. And so I think for me, as someone who's very, very new to the arts world and sort of learning the internal and external politics, it's how the art scene has largely been kept from artists, specifically hip hop artists, because a lot of times rap and hip hop and breakdancing don't get seen as valid forms of art. Yeah. It's situated in a very unique place, and it's on the Doris Duke estate. So before it was a museum of art, it was actually Doris Duke's summer home. And Doris Duke was at one point in time the wealthiest girl in the entire world. So her money and her wealth was accumulated because she was a tobacco heiress. And so there's a lot of things that we need to interrogate with that as well. And for me, in a deoccupied Hawaii, one day Shangri-La, as it is, will not exist. And until then, we have to keep on having these conversations and see what it can mean and be for the rest of Hawaii.
Yeah, because I think what's also kind of interesting, particularly since it's the Center for Islamic Arts, and you were mentioning earlier about hip hop and the importance of Islam in the creation and the foundation of hip hop, right? And then what does it mean to do that kind of art, do that kind of cultural form in a place that's celebrating Islamic arts, but to a large large extent, I think to a wider audience, most folks don't necessarily see the importance of Islam in the formation of hip hop and the development of hip hop, particularly in its kind of earlier stages. So then how did that for you, maybe kind of take us, before we watch the piece, take us into like, what is your process and kind of thinking about what you're going to do, knowing that you do verbal art, verbal play, right? You play music. Like, what was the inspiration and what was your process in going into it?
My process was, there was a lot of research going into this space, and talking with Naveed. There's these paintings, and they're not seen in the piece that I'm doing, but it's literally like a ceramic piece of like aunties, and they didn't call it breakdancing, but they're literally breakdancing in Damascus, in Syria. Like it's the coolest thing to know that there's influence of so many different cultures within hip hop. I'm not gonna detract from like the incredible history that Black folks have made in terms of hip hop and that foundation, but there are also other folks and cultures in the Bronx who experienced hip hop and were like, I wouldn't say integral, but were part of its successions into forming what hip hop can mean and be today. For my process, I was gonna go in and I was just gonna do a standard beat. But I ended up actually stripping the original track that I was using, and I brought a guitar. And the reason why I wanted to do a guitar instead of just your regular beat, and I think it would have been good and either way, is the acoustics in the room were really cool. And it actually got cut out when we recorded, but there was a fountain in the ataba. So having that water playing throughout the course of the song, I really, really liked it. I'm sad it didn't get to happen when we actually published the piece, because some things were kind of funky with the audio. But if there's one thing that I've learned from being in that space and being in Triangular and doing that research, was that it forced me to slow down. I really wanted to take time with the piece that I created. So I committed to going to Triangular at least a couple of times a week. And I had to sit with myself and my thoughts in that room for at least a couple hours each session. And that's something I never allow myself to do, because if I'm alone with my thoughts, then I actually have to like really think about and process things. And it's been a rough year for me. But for me, part of like my process of grief, because I recently my dad passed in the summer. So getting to have some of those reflections be a part of this project was perfect timing, I think. So yeah, that was my process, forcing myself to be alone, to create, to scrap different versions of the song. And actually the last verse was freestyled. And so I was like, it's going to come out the way that it's going to. So having things very intentionally planned, and at the end, just letting what needs to be said. So that was my process.
Yeah, because how does that then, before we go into the video, one more question. So how does that compare with the other things that you've done, right? And we'll watch a couple of the other videos, but like, I'm just thinking in terms of like all the different things that you're talking about, right? And how did this compare to what you've done before?
Time. Honestly, I don't think I've ever worked so long on something, and maybe the end product could have been rushed, but it was the actual experience of being in the 8x8 series that really transformed me as an artist, and it allowed me to think about how we can do art in different ways, how I can bring back guitar. It was like the first time I played guitar in a really long time. I used to play guitar for church for years, so I had a really bad relationship with like the guitar, drums, and like music purely because of those memories. But in having to be in that space, I made that decision because I wanted to rebuild that relationship I had with music. And it's really different than other things that I've done. So I just worked on an album called Ho'okupu, and even some other songs that I've done, it's always been on the fly. So there have been days where we've written 4 songs on an album in 6 hours. And so this is the longest time I've ever had with a piece. And it's what I didn't know that I needed, but it's what I really needed to go through in terms of not just my art, but my life. And so yeah, very different. All the other songs I written on the fly. There's one song that I wrote called Drip Drop. I actually wrote it out of protest because like someone needed to be on the mic. So I just jammed something real quick. But yeah, this is different. But yeah.
Okay. Maybe that'll give us a good moment to actually watch the video.
Liberation is birthed, not borrowed. We will never return them their normalcy. Raised by the hands of matriarchs, the mind is a womb that conceives paths to the revolution. We were made to not only bear children, birthing pains apply when pushing for a nation unbound to patriarchy. Love is not nuclear. Love is the revolution we dream of. This revolution will not be televised, but told through the lives of the sisters who carry us into this new world. In this new world, we are not looking for a flag to stake claim, but to truly see ourselves and each other, to truly know one another. Is it not our mothers who first called us by name? You cannot define. Not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. Not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. Not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. The West don't own queerness, that's just one of the lies. That's why I'll never have blue hair or blue eyes, or raised by hypervisibility. But you see me in time, identity politics are for me to define. It's an honor to see a reflection. Do you just see you in mine? The space between my body and the mirror is I. Not a single gender, several genres. I am responding with the sounds of the metronome is where I find my peace of mind. So, not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. Not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. No, not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. Not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. I am the sum of Papa Earth and Wake Sky, the sibling of Hollow with the grandchild of ʻIhilani lines. Process the love I have, the love I lost, I've yet to find the sum of two lovers who kissed under a drunken sky. My genealogy doesn't fit on charts, it goes like vines. The water that you poison is the blood that flows in mine. Cool and Hina I claim, but it goes both ways, so you call me back every single time, no I deny it. Not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. Not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. Not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. Not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. Used to have 3 lives, bounced on my head like steak knives. Wounds cut deep by arbitrary lines. Sutured by the truth that I'm no longer confined by something that is only as real as time. And so, not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. No, not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. Not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. Not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define.
Awesome. Thank you. Woo. Yeah, Ethan. I mean, Ruben, what do you all think?
Ooh, well, one, Ihi, thanks for sharing that with us. I think it's such an amazing piece where we get to hear you, see, but also, feel a very particular, way that you're performing. And, that gets me wondering, for those that are listening, what are you trying to channel their way? What are you hoping that they're hearing or seeing as you share your piece?
Yeah, I think, that's a great question. I want really folks to learn and hear about my piece. It's that I know that the hook is not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. And I'm saying that because I'm convincing myself in this particular point in time that it's not something that I am. And so even though I'm saying it's like I want folks to know that it can be them too. And sometimes it's really scary, like to declare like who you are to the rest of the world. And so it was scary for me to do, but with the hopes that other people would listen to what I'm saying and have the courage to be their true selves. And so that was the goal. Another goal that I had was for folks to think about how queerness can be understood and looked at differently. And so a lot of times I think there's certain standards to queerness and perceptions of being queer that are so heavily rooted in whiteness, and especially American or European aesthetics. So you have to have the outfits, you have to have the haircuts, you have to be involved in X, Y, and Z scenes. And if we're really looking at queerness, and specifically if we're looking at the word queer, queer just means to deviate from the norm. So if that norm is colonization, if that norm is whiteness, the most antithetical thing to that is being Kanaka. And knowing that there's no one way to be Hawaiian, like to me, that's the most queer thing ever. Aloha Aina is queer, even though there's a lot of heteropatriarchy and movement work, like it is. And we have to understand it as such. Yeah, I will leave it at that. And if you have any other questions, I can address them.
Maybe can you talk a little bit more too about, like, I guess, because queering the gender norms, right? And kind of understanding that, because it's kind of the constant refrain in your piece. So then it's sort of, is this an idea of like you're trying to convince yourself, you're trying to convince your listener just over and over? Or is this more like, like this is like the waters that are right off the side of, by near the cliff there, where it's just like, it's constant. It's constant.
Yeah, it's constant. And so I know I'm saying like not man or woman, I am an energy that you cannot define. So it's not having a definition to that. That is the ebb and flow of who I am. And yeah, and it's, you bring up the cliff by Shangri-La, and those are some of the, I wouldn't say treacherous, but some of the most consistent and ever-changing tides that happen within the South Shore, specifically because Doris Duke built kind of like a boat ramp or a harbor that was never meant to be there, because you can't dredge the reef and expect the tides to not change with it. And, like by nature or by colonization, this Aina and myself have been changed, and it's up to us to figure out how we exist in this flow and resist it at the same time. And so
yeah, it seems like also, like, to again extend the metaphor a little bit more from what you're saying, so it's like these treacherous waters, right? So kind of coming to terms with who we are, kind of understanding ourselves. Sometimes it feels like you're in those waters, whether it's because you're dredging up a thing that you shouldn't be or you're not supposed to be, right? And then trying to figure out, well, what happens now? How do I express myself? Right. And so, yeah, because the other part that I was going to ask too then is, for the other pieces that I've heard, other works that you've done, and I think I asked you this before too. So the guitar, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because, you brought it up a little bit, but what about the guitar? I know I've seen you playing before, but not necessarily in like these settings where it's like, it's Inalihi, it's the artist.
Yeah, I can talk about the guitar specifically, since it's really special to me. So it's like it's an Epiphone. So it's like maybe like the cheaper version of Gibson, but it's a nice guitar. It's an Epiphone Sunburst, and I got it at Coconut Music Grove in Kailua on my 10th birthday. My grandpa got it for me. I was like looking in the store, And like, there's a few times I feel this way, but it's something like I saw and I was like, I just have to have it. And I knew that I couldn't have it because I don't know how much it cost. I think it was like $210.95. And like for a 10-year-old kid, that's like $1 million. But like I asked my grandpa, and by I asked, I said like, oh, that's really cool. Because I've always been a little passive. But yeah, my grandpa got me that guitar, and it's never been perfectly functioning ever since I've got it. It's something that I've always had to fix. There's one of the keys, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but one of the keys that you use to twist and tune the guitar, it's missing. There's never been a key that's kind of fit well with it. And if I ever replace it, it immediately breaks off. I've had to change the wiring within the guitar multiple times. It's like the 99 Toyota Tacoma of guitars. It's like you just have to keep on going back and fixing it. But once you fix it, it works for like a decent amount of time. And so I have like a very interesting relationship with this guitar, and I put it down for several years because I didn't want to deal with it and I didn't want to play it because so many of those memories were attached to being in the church and like the homophobia I experienced, the anti-Hawaiian sentiment that I experienced. But thinking about the course of my life and who gave me that guitar and who taught me to be passionate about music, it was my grandpa. So part of me choosing that instrument was to bring him, and I call him my dad too, like into that space, because why would I leave him at the threshold of everything that I'm doing now that he's passed? And so that was my decision for doing that. Is it perfect guitar playing? No, you can hear it. And I wish that we had time to master the track. I think it was 2 takes. One, me playing the guitar and doing the song, another just saying it so they can overlay the audio. So there's imperfections in there. This is actually the first time that I've listened through it to it all the way through, just because I'm so like cringed out by my own voice. But I like the imperfections in it. I like when I slide up past the key, or like the frets sound a little fuzzy, because it's not gonna be perfect. We can't all be Ryan Hill, who absolutely killed it with the vocals. Nah. But yeah, so that's why I chose to do the guitar. I'm hoping to do more things. I've been learning slack key, and I've been playing guitar since I was really young. So bringing that back into my music, it's a good chance for me to slow down, because I can boom bat, I can give 16, and I can hide behind like the beats. And there's some really gory beats on the album that I just worked on. But for me, it was a chance to be vulnerable, because it's just a more stripped down form of music. And so I was really scared up until the day I was filming. And while I was filming, I kept on asking the beat, am I messing up? Should I just put on the track and like have Toro work with me on it? Told me, no, we don't have time. And I should have said that earlier. So it's okay. But I think it came out the way that it needed to. And I'm glad that I had the guitar there. And I hope to do more with this type of music.
Yeah, and I mean, I think going off of that, when you're mentioning embracing imperfections, there's something about that really adds this different quality to how you're performing, but also, goes along with this larger ethos that you have around care and awareness to how you're crafting your art, your craft, your performance, while staying in tune, with things that go with the context, the space, your being, and more. And so, I'm curious, where does that come from? Where does that attention to this detail come from with you? And how has that been informed through the work that you've done or come into through the community, through your time at UH, whether it's ethnic studies at poli-sci, your education in general? Like, how does that all fit in?
Yeah. So you're talking about like this, where does this intention and care come from? I guess I want to make sure I'm saying this the best I can.
Yeah. And what's shaped that for you?
Yeah. Honestly, and I'm so thankful for them, being raised by my grandparents has given me so much of who I am. And so I really do have to mahalo them. So John, Kelly, Omalu, shout out to you, and Florence Romanes Amadeo. They've instilled such a patience within me that I think I would have never acquired on my own or without their guidance. I think I've always kind of been a more introverted person. And a lot of people, when they meet me, they think that I'm on all cylinders all the time. But if I'm on a Zoom for 2 hours, like I gotta tap out after. So I think just me moving as a person who's generally pretty quiet, unless I'm really comfortable, has given me the space and the ability to be with myself, be with my thoughts, and just reflect. And the older that I get, and I just turned 24 about a month ago, and I feel ancient. Choosing, and I know that's not that old, but I'm choosing to move slower. You know, as someone who's been in student organizing and activism, not since the day that I reached UH, but since I've been really invested in ethnic studies and the movement to protect Mauna Kea, my organizing in a firm, I've made, and I'm continuing to make the decision that I want to be here for a long time. And I think also looking at the life and legacy of Kumuhanani K. Trask, I'm not comparing myself to her. I don't think I'll ever be her, but looking at just everything that she went through and her diligence and that work, and realizing that we can honor someone who was amazing, while also saying that we can have rest, and there's better ways for us to take care of each other and to protect each other. So I've learned a lot from the wahine who came before me, who've experienced so much and done so much. And spent their whole lives fighting, but in return were spent as individuals because of it. So moving slower, really investing in the relationships that I have. I think something that makes me move slower more intentionally is I'm an auntie of 6. I wish I could claim them on my taxes for co-parenting, but I can't, and that's okay. But yeah, just thinking about what I want to see for deoccupied Hawaii. And if I really want those things to come to fruition, I have to be intentional with my time, who I'm investing relationships with, and especially returning to Aina. So I think the thing that slows me down the most is I'm a caretaker of a lo'i at Kako'oiwi in He'eia. And so I've been at that lo'i for about 3 years. I'm the primary caretaker of that. And so having this really close and pili relationship to Aina, where I have to return, where I have to slow down, where I have to pull the weeds, and I have to wipe down each lower leaf when we get, what is it called, aphids? Like, that's allowed me to slow down, and it's drastically changed who I am and how I operate and how I see my art. Yeah, so 3 things. My grandparents, because they raised me, so I have to give credit to them at all times. 2, seeing the incredible wahine who have come before me, who have organized so vigilantly and so tirelessly, and seeing what it's done, like to their bodies and to their relationship, and me wanting to choose to be here for a long time and slowing down and being intentional. And 3, my relationship with Aina, and that being the basis and the foundation of how I see the rest of the world.
Yeah, talking about your relationship with Aina, can you talk a little bit about the organizing that you were doing with Mauna Kea? And because we have a couple of videos that we want to show from when we were at the Mauna, but talk a little bit about that experience for you.
Yeah. And so I really got involved in student activism and organizing in 2017, 2018 as a student freshman at the University of Hawai'i. And I got involved as a student organizer, primarily because I learned that UH is one of the biggest stakeholders in terms of the 30-meter telescope. So the University of Hawai'i isn't the largest funder of the 30-meter telescope going up. They just have the lease to the land, so the lease to the summit of Mauna Kea through the state of Hawaii. And so learning about that and being someone who's Kanaka-Oiwi at the university, I realized that there's a very specific stake I have and a very specific way that I could leverage my relationship to the university through protesting. And not even just protesting, because I think a lot of people think protesting is just holding a sign and rah, rah, rah. It's about being intentional. There's a lot of political education and cultural education that needs to go on. So getting invested in this movement work, I was a part of an org called Kia'ike Kahaukani, or the protectors are being protected by Kahaukani. And Kahaukani is the wind that swirls in Mānoa. And there's a chant, Velina Mānoa, that talks about this wind, Kahaukani, and the rain, this gentle mist, Tuahine. And so that was the name of the org that we were part of. So it was Kanaka Maoli and a few allies And what we would do is we'd go to BOR meetings, Board of Regents meetings, and we would testify and say why there shouldn't be a 30-meter telescope, why the university or any state entities should have no jurisdiction over this va, or like this time, this place, this sacred mountain. We also had aha, or a ceremony, 3 times a day, starting the fall of 2019 semester, and it would coincide with when aha or ceremony was happening on the Mauna. In the spring, well, not in the spring, in the fall of 2019, I was a student organizer at UH, but I was also flying back and forth from Mauna Kea to UH. So some days, or for like a week, I would be on Mauna Kea and I would do classes online. Then I would fly back and I would do classes in person. So the ethnic studies faculty were really, really helpful and really supportive of me being where I thought I needed to be at that time. So that's some of the work that I did. It's pulled me into other work that maybe I can talk about later. And if there's one thing I could say, it's that the issue of Protect Mauna Kea, the issue of TMT, it's so much more than just a telescope. But for me and for so many others, it sets a precedent for what's possible with the state of Hawaii. So if the telescope doesn't go up, who's to say that we can't drain the tanks in Red Hill? Who's to say that we can't save Waimanalo Bay and restore Limu? It really is a precedent. It's so much more about a 30-meter telescope. And I think the state knows that. And so I think the struggle has been made to be bigger than just this TMT. And it's a scary, but also it's a very, very exciting thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. So many gems there. And I was going to go ahead and get us to focus in on the freestyle that you did on Mauna Kea years ago. Hoi Hoi freestyle is what you titled it back before. So we can go ahead and roll that and we'll talk about it a little bit.
They think we won't survive, like we haven't overcome genocide 3 times. They try to steal our minds, but ʻIhilani and still our rise. We lost the whole world, and yet we're still here. The tip of the pen is the tip of the spear, taking up the fight, a brain against brain. Our battleground change our component the same. Our iki they fear, our weapons of war, so I'll fight for this island until I'm a corpse. And then when I die, my old puna will fly off my shoulders. They stand, so they reach for new heights.
I see you making faces about it already. But if you don't mind, can you take us through this a little bit? You know, we're with you, the 3 of us, along with Kumatai, are with you at the Mauna. And, you know, of all things to perform, this is the one that you share with us, you know, and can you take us a little bit behind the scenes of why this particular freestyle and how are you channeling a lot of what we were just talking about into this as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I was making a face because if I could go back and redo the piece, I would add so much more emotion. Why does it sound like I'm so dead inside? I mean, I'm a monotone person in general. And so anytime I add emotion, it sounds insincere. So maybe that's the decision I made as an artist. But yeah, what made me think about doing that? Well, it was a lot of that piece was written on the Mauna. And so I think Kumu Maria Loheleni Brown was doing like some lectures and some classes at Pu'uhuluhulu University on Mo'o. And there were also like so many other different classes happening on the Mauna. And there was at least like 4 sessions a day with like dozens of classes being available. So what I've learned there really inspired me. But yeah, if I could revisit a part of the I guess the piece, it's they think we won't survive, like we haven't overcome genocide 3 times. They try and steal our minds, but ʻIhilani and still I rise. I don't know if you're catching that reference, but I wanted to tie in that because that's I think something that's I think I really like with like my art is I give some references to the scholars and the artists who really resonated with me. In the last piece from Shangri-La, there's a nod to Frank Ocean, where it's used to have 3 lives balanced on my head like steak knives. And that comes from his song, Bad Religion. But yeah, still I rise, almost lost our whole world, but yet we're still here. The tip of the pen is the tip of the spear. And that's a nod or a shout out to Kumu Noenoi Silva and her incredible book, The Power of the Steel Tip Pen. And so for me, I wanted to showcase that piece because a lot of the references that I have within it are from kumu that I was either learning from or reading from at that time. And yeah, Pohoihoi freestyle, that was the first time I think I ever performed it. I wouldn't have done it if it weren't for Pumehana Law. She's an incredible kia'i now living on Kauai, also a part of ethnic studies. Yeah, I wouldn't have done it if it weren't for Law. And she's just someone who you give her the mic and she'll run with it and she'll go. And I think she's phenomenal. So I look up to her. She's amazing. And that's why I chose to do that piece, because her piece inspired me to share.
I'm wondering, since this is so many years ago already, and also being currently, you're such a talented creative writer on multiple fronts, right? Visible academic and an artist. And then at the same time, you're trying to move in and shift and slow down a little bit. I imagine you're constantly thinking, constantly creating in your mind. Do you have enough outlets to really get all of this stuff out? Or are you just sitting on pages and pages of ideas, thoughts, or do you immediately get these things down and out one way or the other?
Yes, it's a great question. Thank you, Ruben. That was fantastic. I think, well, the hard thing is that I have a lot of things in my head, and it's like academic work too, where you have all these concepts, but getting it down on paper is so hard. And it's a commitment to craft. That's a muscle and not an inherent skill that I'm hoping to build. And yeah, like slowing down, I'm definitely trying to take more time to write as well as to read. And it's hard because I work, so I help to teach for the Department of Political Science. I'm an assistant resident director in student housing. I'm a co-coordinator for a firm. So a lot of those things do take up my time. And I'm still trying to figure out how to budget my time and to have that commitment to craft. And one of the kumu who have really tried to hold me accountable and who have been incredibly stern with me, and I think really has inspired me to think about the craft. And I'm saying craft a lot, like of poetry and why words mean things. And it sounds like so simple, but words do mean things. And punctuation also means things too. I'm coming to learn. It's Dr. No'okaho'oli Rivera in the Department of English. She was my mentor. She's going to be my mentor for life, but I was her mentor for this workshop series and this undergraduate research program for about a year. And she's the one who told me like this commitment to craft. Like you can be good, but what good is it if you don't build off the skills that you've acquired like through life naturally? And so budgeting time is something that I really want to work on. And once you learn how to read poetry, it's a whole world of possibilities happen. So I never really got art, honestly, ever. I liked rap, I liked hip hop because that resonated the most with me. Now being able to read poetry in a different way because of what I've learned from Kumu No'u. Yeah, it's also something. I know that's a bit of a tangent. I don't have a perfect answer for how I get these thoughts down. I have a lot of thoughts in my head, but it's also these specific projects that I am so lucky to be a part of that push me to get things out. So whether it be through that poetry fellowship that I did with Kumu No'u, Shangri-La, creating an album with Huyo Kuopa, I've had those outlets that have held me accountable throughout time to make sure, not that I'm pushing out content, but that I'm putting out things intentionally and things that have been reviewed and have been given considerable amount of thought to.
Yeah, so is it different for each of the different kinds of projects that you do? So that like, I kind of want to move into the Ho'okupu project that you recently did as well. Like how does, doing Shangri-La, how does that compare to doing a hip hop anthology of Hawaiian history?
Yeah, well, Ho'okupu is definitely more collaborative and a lot more rootsy. So we literally recorded it in like the bushwhack of Molokai, Kumimi, and I loved it. It was the best, and it was like rap camp. So you wake up early, you work at the fish pond, come back, shower, and you're banging out songs pretty much all day, and then at night you're recording and you're getting everything down. So really, really different different projects, honestly. Like I said, it was collaborative, so there were a bunch of different other artists. Kumonoilani Goju, a professor in political science, is also part of the project, who does some of the background vocals. Purahele Kutsin, who is part of ethnic studies, as well as I think the BAM program is a part of it, as well as a lot of other community partners that ethnic studies has had a long-standing relationship with. So for me, the difference between Ho'okupu creating that album and Shangri-La was one that Kumulipo was definitely way more collaborative, and it's a longer term vision. So even though I think that the Shangri-La project doesn't end once the exhibition closes, I hope that in terms of Ho'okupu, this project becomes bigger and more additions to the album get added. And it came from a vision of seeing a deficit for accurate knowledge on Hawaiian studies and Hawaiian history within the Department of Education. So if you're in the DOE, your Hawaiian studies curriculum is a semester to maybe even like a year at most in elementary or middle school, if you're lucky. Those textbooks that instructors use, and it's not their fault, come from publishing companies in California or Texas. And a lot of inaccuracies are actually within that curriculum. So the way that the Ho'okupu album works is that there's 14 songs. So from Kumulipo, our creation story, until present day, each song hits a different time period and a different concept in Hawaiian history. And in addition to the album, we've created a booklet where teachers have discussion questions, writing prompts, additional resources. So teachers will get lesson plans and students will get music to listen to. So that's the concept of the project. We're hoping to take it to different schools and different islands, whereas Shangri-La was for specifically the 8x8 series. And I hope to expand more on these concepts of gender and identity, but that as a project is pretty much done, but never finished.
For this, I think we're going to go to a video from that project, the Ho'okupu project.
Show me your cannon, show me your gunpowder.
There's several ways in our culture to gain power.
Every box checked in place, temple towers.
Technology to make my enemies cower.
Swells of change crash upon the shore in a form unfamiliar, born treachery aboard by the scores. Entranced by its shimmer, hit the tip of the sword. You don't see it till you feel it when it rips through the core. Helping hands embracing greedy palms that squeeze in, grips that leave prints, slits and seeps in, lips that speak myths from ships on sea drift. They breathe rich while trading gifts for cheap tricks. They stacking chips, we stacking stone, and when the chips are down, the structures made of stone will stand alone. Iron rusted, dusting back to bones. Misguided trusting just enough to grab a hold. This was predicted and perceived as just preposterous. Visions depicted, prints were carved into the rock as such to illustrate a rival brought diseases that would slaughter, plus articulate the struggle in the language of the conquerors.
Our diplomacy is far from Eurocentric. We have stories from the east and the west ends of the globe. The story unfolds clearly. ʻIhilani in Macau on his own, roaming the streets, ʻIhe in hand, Hawaiʻi on his mind, Ula on his back. They raveled at his grandeur, 6 feet tall in stature. OBV man and Florida man's the heart is what he captured. Boarded the ship, mid-year from lease. Sailed to Mindanao, south end of the Philippines, Vancouver, Alaska, and islands. Illusion around the world and back again. There is no illusion. Exploration is innate to our existence. We know our home and who we are. Nothing's gonna change it. Moku'o how I anchor, empowered to go far. Love for the land and people as the compass of our heart.
Show me your cannon, show me your gunpowder.
There's several ways in our culture to gain power.
Every box checked in place, temple tower.
Technology to make our enemies cower.
Ona kuaiili ai o kukaili mo kuapau. O ki hawa hine I ho o mana ai mai ko ke volani mo o kuauhau. Hali hali mai la na poaku. Kulu na hea ua ki I mai na ki I kapu. Ana ia puni ho I mai ka mole a ka vela.
Ruben, I think you had questions about this video and the process and everything else with this.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to kind of point out the community around there. Who is in the audience? How did they get there? What did this event mean to them? And then, of course, how did you artists kind of curate that?
Thank you, Ruben. That's a great question. And so there's a lot of different community members in the audience, which I thought was really cool, because sometimes hip hop attracts a specific scene or crowd. Like we kind of know everyone in the hip hop scene who goes to the shows. But we actually had a lot of educators in the crowd, which I think is super awesome. So one of the folks who you see in the audience is Dr. Kalehua Krug, and he's the principal for Kauai Public Charter School. But yeah, we had a couple of educators, we had different organizers, we had folks from ethnic studies. Some of them graduated from the department already. In the crowd, we had folks from different, some from different islands who just like stopped by and were on island and wanted to check out the show. And so for me, the audience was really cool because it's who we wanted to attract for the project. And there's no specific population that we wanted folks to interact with the project. Of course, we wanted kids from the DOE and teachers to have this. But we also wanted families to come in and learn about this too. And so one of the cool things that after we had this album release party is we had folks who were tagging us where their kids as young as 3 were singing along to some of the stories. And for me, that's the best thing. No awards or accolades are needed, but if kids are really learning and internalizing the material and they're able to talk about kuka ilimoku, kamehameha ekolu, that's the job has been done. And so we got that audience by reaching out to a variety of different groups. So the album contributors are also very diverse. So we had folks from almost every single island. So of course there's like a different flavor, different style. So we had folks come in from there. Different folks in education, like I said, organizing. I think that was reflected in how I guess this material, this album got dispersed, where we have folks from charter schools, we have folks in the diaspora, all different places who are listening to this music. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question well. We created this group. Honestly, we put it on Instagram, and so whoever came, they showed up, and that was pretty cool. And then for longer term, it's reaching out to schools here and also on the continent with high levels of Kanaka and diaspora to see if this would be something they'd be interested in.
Yeah. How's the response been so far to this project? Right.
There's been a lot of really good feedback. A lot of folks were wanting to hear something like this, which I think is really cool. And on the other hand, there's folks who think that Hawaiian music should just be traditional olala Hawaii walino, or just in the Hawaiian language. So there's been a little bit of pushback, a little bit of critique. And for me, like that's completely okay. And I'm not comparing ourselves to the All Creative Boys, but when they released their rendition of Kavika, which was a traditional chant, a lot of folks were against it. So I think if you're doing something that has critique and doing something that not a lot of people or a few people don't agree with, that's actually okay. And that's, when we look at it, like what the function of hip hop is to use your voice to say something, to ruffle some feathers, and to speak your truth. So there's been mixed reviews, definitely more positive than negative. But yeah, I think it's definitely the first of its kind, but it won't be the last, I hope.
Wasn't Kavika sampled by Sudden Rush?
Mm-hmm.
One of the songs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because was it on Ea? I forget which, but I think so.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things I wanted to ask was the language use. So then, and kind of like the combination of cultural forms. So then you have Maile and you have rap. You have like kind of chant, but then also like the beats in the. It's that I guess can you talk a little bit more about that, because it seems like I think people might be like, well, this is not what we're supposed to be doing as Kanaka, or this is a different kind of art form. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So for the question of like, for people feeling like it's not what we're supposed to be doing, I would just show them our own history. Kanaka have always been doing things that they weren't supposed to be doing. How do you think we got a monarchy? Like maybe that, maybe we should start there. And for me, it seems like, why would this exist? But for me, it's why wouldn't it? And I think is delayed. The timing of this album should have been years before, because there was no shortage of talent or no shortage of knowledge. So I think the coming of Ho'okupu's arrival is like, it's something that should have been expected, especially when there's such an ono for hip hop. And a good way that you can think about that is Sound Shop, and what Punahele, Naveed, and Rakadam are doing in the schools through the Honolulu Museum of Art. Kids are really hungry to learn through this medium and style. And so for folks who think that it's like there's no place for this here, like there's always going to be room, and it's this scarcity logic, either in Lahui politics or even in art, that prevent really interesting projects from bursting forth. So I know that we may be wrapping up in a little bit. So yeah, that's what I'll say to that, to keep it brief. It's, yeah, of course, this album would have happened eventually, given like the ono for hip hop and the ono for folks to learn about this. And not everyone can get a Hawaiian studies degree at the university. Not everybody can learn olelo. And so hopefully like this piece through this album is just one educational material that will give folks the ability to learn more at their own time and pace.
Awesome. Any last questions or anything, E or Ruben? No? Any last thoughts, E, before we head out?
Yeah, just mahalo to you folks for having me. I've been a huge fan of the show since I was 18. And as a graduate of ethnic studies, I'm so proud to come from this department, so proud to revisit you folks to this episode. I'm sitting now in my office in political science, doing my PhD in Indigenous politics. I'm living one of my dreams, and that wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for the three of you supporting me since I was bebe. So mahalo.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks to you. Yeah, and on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in on this episode. Shout out to our co-hosts. Shout out to ʻIhilani. Shout out as well to Erica. And please stay tuned for our next episode. Have a good one.
Straight out West Field, no rest, no sleep. We stay up all night plotting ways to take down our enemies. Yeah, they got their tactics, don't give them a reaction. Sit back and laugh as we deploy the methods to the madness. They're strong and organized, and then we mobilize. Don't need a telescope to see a bunch of racist guys impose those bullshit fines just for being Hawaiian. All in the unjust name of motherfucking pseudo-sense. I kneel for the flag, but I stand for the Mānoa. This is all too literal, bro, there is no implicit counter. Hit hard like 1 point pounder. I ku'i and ku'e. Ike la, I'm each and every day. 982 will rest, I will gladly be the next. An X across my chest makes for good target practice. This is not civil unrest, it's interest to divest. Kanaka Maui defending what? Kupuna left. Track record of mismanagement and we ain't really having it. Go bulldoze your own temple, cause Aina is our Sabbath. Calling out the border regions, fabrications like a seamstress, TMT and don't care fuck that. I guess that UH is the mistrust in the system, a Hawaiian place of learning. We all really know it's just a holiday place of earning, not indigenous serving, but cultural prostitution. A multiracial paradise is the central illusion. It's not about homogeny, it's about Kanaka, honestly. Our erasure is their gain, it's reified in policy. It's written in the clouds, you see that no one's got the time to see. Lucrative and victimized, how colonizers always be.